Welcome. I'm Josh Rogers, co-founder and CEO of YOKE Leaders. You've found a recording from our Operator series. This session is beyond a balance sheet, and it features three people I'm glad to have in the room. Lauren Rilling of Savvy Stewardship, Ian Crawford of Vector Business Advisors, and Bree Page of Keep 75. But before we get into it, a quick word on who we are and why we host these. YOKE is a marketplace connecting founder and owner-led businesses with experienced executives we call co-builders. The name, it comes from a piece of farm equipment most of us have never seen up close, but it connects two animals into a team so that they can pull a load neither one could pull alone. And that's the whole idea. Most owner-led businesses hit a ceiling that isn't a strategy problem. The owner is carrying something they were never meant to carry alone. And the fix, it's not another deck. It's someone who has done the work, who gets close enough to feel the weight, and who stays long enough to build with them. And there's a second half to that. When we went fractional, we left hallways, the unplanned conversations, the peers we used to think out loud with, and nothing replaces that automatically. So we build rooms like this one, where operators hear how somebody else priced it, how they structured it, and where they meet each other. In today's room, it sits at the intersection of operations and finance. You'll hear what the numbers miss in the first few weeks of an engagement, how to tell an owner who wants to help from one who's actually ready to receive it, and where these three draw the line on what they will and won't carry. Let's jump into the conversation with Lauren, Ian, and Bree. Lauren, can you start by giving us sort of a 60-second version of who you are and what got you into the fractional space, the kind of businesses you work with, and what pulls you towards serving them?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Rilling. My business is called Savvy Stewardship. I believe that that everything that we do is about stewarding what we have, and so that's why uh, the name of my company. But the way that I got into business finance was actually through personal finance. But I'll save the long story for another time. But seeing business owners struggling in their personal finances, yet seeing how much revenue they were making, and realizing, ooh, something's going on here. Let's try to solve this challenge, and realizing that, okay, if we can solve the problems of cash flow and profit, we can make a really big difference here. And I love making the numbers really simple, easy to understand, because I don't have my academic background is not in finance. So I had to learn, take classes, kind of work my way up over the last 10 years, and sort of landed in the fractional space almost by accident, but a wonderful blessing. It's a great fit for me. I love working with a variety of clients, mostly with service-based businesses in the 2 to 10 million range. It's an exciting time of growth and building teams, and just a lot going on operationally. And so I think it's just really fun to dig in there at whatever stage of growth that they're in, and really help that business owner make better informed decisions.
Awesome. Thank you. Bree, what about you?
Hi, everybody. My name is Bree Page, and I run a firm called Keep 75. 75% of all of the value in deals in private equity now come from operational improvements and no longer from financial engineering. So that is where my name comes from for my business. And I essentially work in the lower middle market, installing operating rhythms, serving as a fractional operating partner or fractional COO for the private equity firms themselves or their portfolio companies. Interestingly, my background is completely in the publicly traded sector. I like to joke this is only the third job I've had out of college. So I have a pretty long tenure at my first two roles of 15 plus years at Procter and Gamble, where I helped them grow their billion-dollar business portfolio globally. I got a chance to travel to some awesome locations. That was a really great experience. And then I moved on to Google, and I worked in their strategy and operations organization, and really just learned how to operate at with a very, very big balance sheet. So for about 2 years ago, I started advising in the private equity space, and then I've recently gone independent myself. And one of the reasons why I really like to serve the lower middle market is because I think oftentimes founders and CEOs can be very overwhelmed after they receive such large investment from private equity backers and other types of investors, and everything in their world is changing, and kind of the life as they know it has completely changed once they take that investment. And so I like to help those founders really get into the business rhythms that they need to sort of walk with a little bit more sure footing into their new world as with private equity as an investor.
Awesome. It's a great story. Ian, what about you?
Hi, my name is Ian Crawford. I run Vector Business Advisors for a little over 10 years at this stage. Vector, the name is important because it means in a mathematical context, it has both direction and magnitude. And that's really important to me in my background. I got into being a fractional by being very bad at all the other things that I tried. Namely, I owned an agency and people would come to me. I was doing digital marketing and conversion rate optimization. Clients would come and ask, hey, can you build me a funnel or build me a web page? Or I'd say, yeah, I can't do that, but help me understand why you want to do that. And invariably, the goals that they had for their business, I would turn around and say, yeah, I totally get it. I can do these things, but I'm not sure that's your best move right now. I don't think it's going to deliver exactly what you expect it to deliver, or there's a better way to do that. And invariably, they would turn around and say, okay, thanks, and go pay somebody else to build the thing that they came in the door asking. So it took me, I was pretty stubborn. It took me a while to figure out that what I actually wanted to do was show up as a consultant and help people grow their business. But how I was showing up in the marketplace was as an agency owner where people were coming in the door asking for a specific thing already. So once I finally figured that out, I got hired into a few opportunities essentially as a fractional straight away without calling it that at the time, but some venture capital, private equity to help grow the businesses. And that really was a much better fit to the consultative posture that I wanted to take about solving the growth problem. Why I named it Vector, though, is very important because I wanted to work with people who had normative or qualitative goals for their business itself. And so being able to take those as an input, work with the founder and their team, and to figure out what it is that they were trying to achieve, the impact they were trying to make, and then do the process and operational piece to engineer that outcome was really the culmination of my very frankly frustrating journey. So that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. I do a strategy piece. My focus is then installing the operational systems and processes to achieve those goals. And then I can show up as anything from sort of back office support to a fractional COO role, a leadership role on the team. So once I figured that out, things got a lot easier. That's what I've been doing for the last about 10 years.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited to get to the questions at the end, and we can probe into some more of the journeys that each of you guys had because they're very fascinating. But let's start with you, Lauren. I'm going to go back to you, and I think what I'd love to sort of hear from you is I think anytime we're starting sort of a new owner led, sort of a new engagement with a new owner led business, inevitably it's very easy to want to sort of jump in and sort of like hit the ground running. But oftentimes the numbers may or may not tell the full story. So, what do you learn in the first few weeks that the financials completely failed to reveal when you start partnering with a new business?
Why is the short answer. No, let me just tell you a little story about the client that I recently onboarded. The business owner, actually, they recently migrated over to NetSuite from QuickBooks Desktop. So if you're a fractional CFO, their business is like 5 million a year. So you're probably going like, oh no, why'd you do that? But he's like, I'm so committed to NetSuite. I love it. We just went live like 3 weeks ago. Everything's going amazing. And I'm like, and we're gonna grow into it. And this is what I want to do. I'm like, okay, I mean, that's what you want to do. You already did it. I'm not gonna tell you this was a mistake. Like we're just going with it. And it wasn't a mistake, but it was a big deal. Well, anyway, I get into the numbers and realize this this did not go as well as the business owner thought it did. And we realized there were probably about $50,000 revenue from that month of invoicing. Like we probably should have billed about $50,000 more, and we don't know where that money is or why it didn't get billed. So that was one issue that we ran into. So some of it can be accounting processes. Some of it can be gut feel from what you talk about versus what the numbers actually show. Some of it can be that the numbers are maybe entered correctly from a bookkeeping perspective, but then operationally there's something deeper going on. And so there's just so many things. It's full of surprises. And I think that the way that I like to handle those surprises is by going, okay, let's make sure we set and manage expectations really, really well from the beginning so that when these surprises come up, these are conversations that the client knows that we're going to have, not if we find certain things, but when we find them, this is how we're going to approach it.
So a great point. I mean, that feels like it could significantly change the trajectory of what you were thinking you're doing.
Yes, and so part of what I can. Well, and I think this is something that we fractional CFOs, and I'm sure COOs too, like when you meet with a new client and you start to dig into what this is actually going to entail, we all have our scope of services, and this is the scope, and this is what I do. And then you can all tell me if I'm the only one who finds themselves in this situation. I don't think I am. Shoot, in order to do my job, I need these other things done, but I don't really want to do these things, or I don't know how to do these things, or, and so, or I'm not getting paid to do these things. And so, part of what I do now is I say, okay, client, like, I'm going to ask you for a 3-month commitment. This is what we're going to accomplish in the first 3 months. And then after that, if it's month to month, but if it's not a great fit, that's okay. Like, we can part ways. That way we have a really clear agreement, and I'm not, we're not going to be stuck in like the next 12 months of either me saying, hey, scope creep, or hey, I have to charge you for this, or hey, I just can't do this for you. Yeah, so that is helpful. And then the other thing I've started doing is also doing an accounting assessment so that we're not finding things 3 months down the road that we should have found, at the very beginning. And that way we can have those honest conversations up front about what's going to be required to move forward together.
Bria, I imagine, especially in the private equity space, having worked in sort of in some portcos myself, like there's a lot of things that the financials don't often reveal when firms are making investments, and it can create all sorts of challenges. What's been your experience?
Yeah, I'm happy to share. Before I start, I wanted to warn everyone. Something about the way I talk with my hands, and I haven't figured out what it is yet, will randomly signal balloons to come up over my face on Google Meets. If I'm talking about like a bad situation and like these happy balloons come up, just know that I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know how it happened. But yeah, I mean, I like to say that I am a human first operator. And when I go in and I install operating systems in businesses, I actually start with an evaluation of the leadership team, of their cultural and team dynamics right off the bat. You could be making money and you could be, looking positive on paper, but you could have an extremely unhealthy dynamic that would not be sustainable. And so it got you to the period of investment. But then when investment comes in and they're expecting you to grow faster, whatever the dynamic was that got you there, it might not be something that can get you to the next level. Like what got you here won't get you there, kind of a thing. So I find that a balance sheet doesn't really tell you the whole story about what's going on within the team. Are your leaders primed for change? And do you have, the right leaders with the right responsibilities? So that's where I always like to start my engagements.
What about you, Ian?
Yeah, so many thoughts on this one. The first is that the P&L is a very blunt instrument. I usually sort of give it a cursory look if they volunteer it or if I even require it. And then I'm like, okay, great. And typically one thing I recommend is like, hey, you need to go talk to Lauren. Like, I have no idea whether or not this P&L represents the actual metrics that you should be targeting. And I think if all you're looking at is a P&L, you're focused on too broad of a metric. So in my context, in like a growth context, they usually look at something, they see like top line revenue, or they see a line of business or something like, let's make that go up. It's like, yeah, maybe, but they immediately go to the next step of, to make that go up, I got to hire 3 more salespeople and do this and do this. It's like, yeah, that's a path, and it's a path based on the P&L and L and some of the line items there. But what I actually care about is understanding, is this the right thing to be optimizing, the right variable to be optimizing in the first place? Then are the metrics that you're targeting that produce these results that show up on the P&L, are those the right metrics that we should be measuring? So like a concrete example is, people always, I shouldn't say always, tend to focus on growing sales, right? How do I get more leads and then convert more of them? It's like, yeah, those are valuable things, but you might be able to boost revenue by 30 or 40% simply by offering a new tier of service or a higher price point, higher ticket item for your existing audience. That's a whole lot more efficient, a lot faster to get there. That's not going to show up on the P&L if you're just looking at this, say, we need to force more volume through this existing infrastructure. So the short answer is, I don't use the P&L a lot, but I often look at it and then say, hey, go talk to a CFO if you don't have one. Like, you need a fractional. They need to check your books, your accounting structure and setup, and then make sure that we're actually seeing data at this top level that represents your actual business growth goals.
It's a great point. Bree, you made a comment sort of about the balance sheet, sort of the P&L not really necessarily telling the full story, which, and Ian reiterated that. But so think about sort of the space that you're in and just sort of thinking about the venture or the PE equity back space. There's a lot of conflict there between maybe finance says we need, what operations says we need, and then what our investors say we need to do in order to fulfill the mandate and the thesis that ultimately led the investment. So as you think about sort of those areas or those friction points, where do you see, where are the areas where people often see things differently the most, and what have you found to be the best way to resolve those disconnects?
Is yes an acceptable answer to this question? I find that so the way that I operate in my corporate career and through my role in portfolio companies, and I mentioned I'm human first. I really go in and need to establish a foundation of trust with the other leaders that I have across my business, CFO, CEO, whoever it is. Because actually, Josh, I think that you should be almost in constant disagreement in leadership team meetings that you're having, and you should be pushing each other to understand whether or not we need to improve operations, decrease spend, whatever it is. And the disagreement really should not bring about discomfort. It should bring about stronger, greater, better business results. And so I honestly have a hard time thinking of one example where I got into a bit of a disagreement with my CFO because that's our job, right? It's the CFO's job to push operations to understand, are we going to like we want to have the best experience for our customer or our consumer at the lowest cost. And you have to be lockstep holding hands. But what you don't see behind the curtain is we've just argued for an hour and then we have to disagree and commit and come out and look to the organization like CFO and COO are hand in hand. And so I disagree all the time. It's one of my favorite things to do. And then I always make sure I grab a coffee or lunch or something afterwards because it's not personal. It's just, iron sharpens iron, right? And so we have to make sure that we are like constantly helping each other grow and succeed. But I do have a story. In many years, I worked in customer care and customer support. And, finance was always telling us like pull money out, automate processes. We don't want humans in the loop, just like make it as cheap as possible. And then the operations side of the business, I knew what was going to happen. Our customer satisfaction was going to tank. And so ultimately, what we drive back to in these discussions are what is our strategic goal and what are our core values? If our strategic goal is a top line growth goal and our value is, cost and spend, then yeah, let's automate it. Let's automate it and let's CSAT falls. And we all just know as a business that we are going to reach our goal for savings and cost this year and CSAT is going to tank. But if our goal is more consumer or customer driven and we want to maintain CSAT, then that is the decision maker that we have to go back with finance and say, you can only cost save so much before we start to see an impact on CSAT. And that was like a daily conversation again. So I think it just goes back to one, trusting your team and being comfortable in the discomfort, pushing each other. And then two, you have to have a set of core values and a strategy because that's the tiebreaker in the room in these conversations. If you do it right, you can turn back to your strategy and core values and say, we set out at the beginning of the year, we were going to do this, and we need to make the decisions to help us achieve that.
That's great. Ian, Lauren, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I've always found that CFO work is a lot more operational. It's much more operational and forward looking than it is like backwards looking in accounting. So I've never taken the position of it's my job to help you to just make as much. I mean, making as much money as possible is one goal, but it is not necessarily the highest goal. I want to dig in and find out, okay, what is it- my client's the business owner. What is it that you are trying to accomplish? And if they say, like to your point, Ian, I want to grow top line revenue. Well, why? Why do you want to grow top line revenue? What are you thinking that that is going to do for you personally, or what is this that you're envisioning for the company? And it's like, oh, well, because if we grow, I'll make more money and I'll be able to do this and I'll be able to, well, maybe not. What if we could increase your net profit by 20 and you could take home this much more and then you didn't even have to do any more work for it. You actually just reallocated your dollars more effectively. Oh, well, that would be really great. And then you would have more money to grow in this way instead of this way. Like, oh, I actually like that better. Okay, so then maybe we don't want to focus on top line revenue growth this year. It really depends, right? But I have a client who was running an annual conference every year, and this was like their main marketing engine. It was also just like their baby. And it was this signature thing that their company did every single year. And it was a really, really cool conference. But when we looked at how much money it cost versus what they were actually tracking as their financial ROI, I was like, is it worth it to you? So that was one question, is it worth it? And then the second question was, can you actually afford it? And honestly, like they couldn't. Like it cost them $125,000 a year and they couldn't point to any direct ROI on it. And I said, if I could give you $125,000 back in your hands, is this what you would choose to do with it? And then the other thing I think is that I like to provide guardrails. I feel like sometimes half my job is just saying no. No, you can't afford to do that, which is not fun. But the fun part is to say, well, here, if you want to do this, here's the financial risk. If you want to go for it with that understanding and that knowledge, then go for it. As long as you understand these are the financial risks, this is what has to go right in order for you to achieve this. And here are sort of the financial guardrails. And then really I love to empower my client to make those operational decisions, but from a place where, like, if you're going to disagree with me and you're going to go a different direction, I want you to really know exactly what it is that you're doing.
I'll add one quick thing. Just I think the alignment that Bree is talking about and Lauren's talking about are really important. And it's funny when I'm not always working with venture backed companies or companies that have excess cash, like a lot of founding bootstrap companies that are still founder led. That tension you're talking about between between the financial seat and the operational seat is literally the same person. And so they're sitting there thinking like, yes, I want to invest in growth, but that means foregoing cash or foregoing something now to invest in this growth opportunity. And is that going to work? I don't know. There's so much emotional baggage, with so many other dynamics that come into that equation when it's not just a spreadsheet or it's not someone else's money. And there, I think that alignment with the wider goals is really important, as well as with things like your market positioning. Like there's all kinds of tactics you can go read about in books and on the internet for how to achieve certain things. But if those tactics are not aligned with your business model and your positioning in the market, then oftentimes it's like you just plug this tactic in and it backfires because it costs you money in the short run. There's the opportunity cost of pursuing that, and it alienates your current clients. So if your position is a high service, customer experience and a luxury positioning or a high ticket item, and you start introducing these tactics that come out of the SaaS world that are all about reducing costs and, taking humans out of the loop, like that's a lose, lose, lose. And you don't necessarily know until next quarter or, or after that.
Josh, you're muted.
I hit
Yeah,
him.
you muted that.
It did not work. Now it did. What I was saying was I was struck by listening to each of you. There's this common theme, and unsurprisingly, right? I mean, we hear this a lot, I think, in all of our spaces, that our ability to be effective is really driven by our ability to drive trust and build the trust and earn the ability to be heard. But even in situations where you can earn the trust, there's a difference, I think, between trust and readiness. So, Ian, I'm curious for you, like, what separates an owner who says they want help from one who's genuinely ready to let go of something and actually receive help?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's difficult to know on the front end. I mean, there are certain signals that you can get. The key one that I look for, a lot of people just want to learn, especially if it's, founder led. They're inquiring, they're seeking expertise. That's wonderful. I love helping people, teaching people, sharing information. It's not the same thing as needing me, as a service provider to come alongside them and help. So in an initial conversation, I'm looking for those signals of, are you trying to learn? Sometimes I'll just ask, like, are you just trying to learn about this and understand your situation? Or are you looking for somebody to take this off your plate? And, if the answer is that they're looking for some help, then it becomes a disqualifiers question, like, can you afford it? Do you have a clear idea of what the problem is? Can you make a decision? Like those kinds of things becomes much more tactical. But something I want to call out as well, like more systematically, Lauren was talking about this earlier in different terms, but that 3-month engagement or 30-day engagement or whatever that initial discovery engagement is, I always start there. So whatever you say in the meeting, we can have a lot of great conversations, and I can disqualify some people from that because they're not ready. I usually then try and give them resources or point them to other places where they can do more learning, and then invite them to come back later on. But if we're going to do some work together, I'm going to start with, hey, let's do this discovery engagement, the strategy engagement. There's a lot of different terms for it, but it is that paid engagement that's designed to both understand the situation, to, on my side, determine what level of service they need, whether or not I'm the right person to deliver that. And it protects both sides in having some working experience with one another, setting expectations, and having clear criteria for what success in the next, which would be kind of the full or the core engagement, what that looks like. So for me, the readiness piece is, there are some signals, but it's not entirely reliable. I think the only reliable thing is that hands-on working experience together in some kind of discovery or initial engagement.
Can I build on that? I would totally agree with what Ian was saying about like the discovery and initial engagement. I'm in a very interesting spot because oftentimes I'm brought in by the private equity firm into the portco. So the portco didn't maybe even know they needed help, or they certainly weren't ready asking for help. And so yeah, I'm lucky if I walk into a situation where someone's like, "Oh, thanks, I'm so glad you're here. We really need your help." It's most often not like that. And so to Ian's point, I actually go even a shorter level engagement, and I have a 2 to 3 day workshop that sometimes I'll require I run with the team just to understand how their C-suite is going to respond to me. And after that, I can come in and give, a second level of assessment of where I could be of service. But the things that I talk about during that session are a lot of what I've been talking about, like psychological safety among the team, building trust through vulnerability, having a core purpose that everyone agrees on. And if I'm getting a lot of head nods, I know that I'll probably proceed with, pulling together a contract and working on an engagement. If you're picking up your phone, if you're not paying attention, if no one reaches out to me afterwards, I go to get coffee and no one's coming up around the, coffee pot, like they're really small signals. But in my case, like they have to be there because when you're brought in by the investment firm, there's nothing short of a miracle that I could do to get them to sort of trust me if they're not going in with an open mind. So, Lauren hits the nail on the head. It's like you have to figure out the time length of your engagements so that they're getting an ROI and we're getting both ways. But yeah, trust can be hard when someone's telling you to trust someone. That's not always how trust is built.
Yeah, totally. And I would add to that, like that those small signals. Took me a lot of years to learn to pay attention to those because I used to dismiss those as like, I'm sure it's fine, like whatever. And then it was like, it was not fine. And there was a part of my brain that knew it, that my rational brain wanted to override. But and I know this, I hope this doesn't come across as like all woo woo and whatever, but I really feel like when you're on a consultation with a prospective client, and you're just having that, whatever your process is, if it's one meeting, if it's a series of meetings, for me, like I can feel it in my body. Like if I'm starting to feel a little anxious, or I'm feeling like I have to carefully about what I'm going to say or how I'm going to respond, or if I'm just not feeling as confident or as empowered to like help, it almost feels like being interviewed for a job or an assistant position rather than, hey, I want to bring you on as like a thought partner. And so like there's so much going on in these meetings, right? You're trying to listen, yeah, discernment, Josh, exactly. You're trying to listen, you're trying to like really wrap your head around the conversation. So like you're not consciously processing maybe all of those tiny little signals, but there is a part of your brain that is. And I try to pay attention to just like just that intuition and to go with that. And it's served me pretty well. And then but you can't know everything, from that. And so in addition to that, having that scope where it's not necessarily a trial period, but it's like a stage one. And I would say just don't be afraid to lean into that because it's like it can feel like, oh no, I'm gonna have to sell myself twice, right? But I would say don't be afraid to lean into that because that is, I think, trust building when you say, this is my process, this is how we start. And as long as it's a great fit and we're gonna accomplish these things in the first 3 days or in the first month or first 3 months. And when you can do that, then it lets you be a lot more relaxed and bring your best to your client. And then I think the relationship from there can only be better.
It's great. Bree, you were giving me PTSD as you're talking about that because that was one of my last endeavors before I actually set out on my own. Was I got recruited in by a PE firm to a portco, and I asked the question when I got my offer, "Hey, is everybody on board with this?" And I got the, yeah, yeah, yeah. no worries. It'll be fine. 12 months later, we'll say, I very quickly made a decision that it was not fine. And so I think that discernment and what Lauren is talking about in terms of that feeling is it's important to have systems. It's important to have processes wrapped around it so that we don't get entirely rely on our emotions. But let's also not negate the fact that we've all been doing this for a very long time in many cases. And you do develop a bit of a spidey sense around sort of what those when things aren't quite right. And it's important to sort of listen to that. So awesome. Well, I want to make sure that I make good on my promise. We're about 10 minutes over in terms of the time, and so I do want to make sure I relinquish the rest of the time for folks just to engage with one another, ask questions. I mean, the value of this is, yes, I'm grateful for Lauren and Bree and Ian for giving of their time and answering a few questions. But the rest of you have lived experience and valuable experience as well, and we can all learn and grow from one another. So I'd love to just open the floor up, and anybody who has any questions from anything that was said, asked, or additional thoughts that you want to layer on, we'll just continue the conversation.
Hey, Josh, I can chime in. You hear me okay? Hey, you asked a really good question, and Ian had a really good response about separating an owner when you're talking to them about, whether they say they want help versus are they really ready to offload and take the help. I'm just curious from Lauren and Bree as well, your guys' perspective. And just for context, Ian knows this, but I'm transitioning from kind of this full-time, COO role in my history into the fractional space and working through some pipeline opportunities right now. But one of the things that I've experienced over the last couple of roles is joining organizations where I thought there was strategic alignment with the founder who was leading the business in the way of like, hey, you want true change, but obviously after realizing that in a full-time role, right, there's some second guessing of like, yeah, you're not ready. You're not really ready for change. So you guys evaluate that in a fractional sense. What are some other experiences or maybe tips that you could share as well?
So Josh, are you asking like just even more on how to like suss out whether or not they're ready for that?
Yeah, I guess maybe what I'm saying is it always in your guys' experience been start with a shorter engagement and really discern it through that process? Or there are things you've been able to evaluate maybe in the relationship building stage that gives you clear indicators?
No, it's not always been my experience. I always say yes, and then I get into these experiences. And I'm like, what am I doing? We're totally misaligned. So no, I made so many mistakes, and I think like now I am much more focused in on, yeah, trying to start with shorter engagements, or even like Josh said, the PE firm was bringing him in, but he hadn't yet had a conversation with anyone potentially like in the portco just to understand. Just I think discernment is really the key answer. I think oftentimes when you're going into the fractional space or when you're doing something on your own and you get someone that wants to work with you and they want to sign this contract and you're so excited and you're doing it and you feel so successful, but you really do have to take a step back and ask like, is this an environment where I am going to be able to succeed? And of course, I only ask that now because I've made the mistake, but would say maybe just think through like you were on the other side and someone was coming in to advise you, what would you need to feel comfortable with them, and then maybe work that a little bit into your process. So for
Yeah.
example, like if a PE firm were to bring me in now, I'm always meeting with at least 3 different people on the leadership team before I present them with a contract to engage. I don't always do like a 1 or 2 day session, but oftentimes I'll throw it in, or I'll ask for the opportunity to do it sort of on like a pro bono basis just to see how they respond. And then you just start making that a pattern and sort of putting it into your process. But it all takes time and trial and error. So if you get into a place where you find like, oh, this was just a mistake, like don't be too hard on yourself. Just recognize those signals that you saw that made you realize, oh, this isn't going to be a trusting relationship, and kind of make a mental note to look for those sooner, I think.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I really like that, and I don't think it's always possible to know for sure until you get in there. And so I wouldn't put so much pressure on yourself to figure it out at the very, very beginning. Like, I need to figure out if they're ready or not for this. I think there are some questions you can ask about just really open ended. What led you to reach out? What led you to this point? What are your goals? How can I serve you? And okay, yeah, those are things that I can help you with. That's in my wheelhouse. Or okay, that's really not in my wheelhouse. I could take a stab at it if you want me to, or hey, let me refer you, to this other person. But if they come to you with this is why I reached out, this is what I'm trying to do, and you're like, yeah, I can help you with that. Like, that'd be awesome. To me, that's a green flag. And then when you explain your process, I feel like if you can get a good whatever that initial process is for you, if you can build discernment into that, like just started doing I call it a 30-day onboarding, and I do like a pretty comprehensive assessment, and I talk with lots of people and have lots of conversations because the numbers do not tell the whole story and on their own on paper. And I go and I present it and I go, okay, here's what I really strongly recommend, or here's what absolutely has to get done. This is like an emergency or whatever. And we have those conversations then, and I kind of see how does my client respond, right? Is it collaborative? Does it feel like it's being well received? Are we finding some alignment or a way forward? And that way, that's another signal, right? And then I work with them for a couple more months and deliver on all the things I said I was going to do. But I think that whole process, you have to have like a clear out for yourself if you need it.
Yeah, I'd also say, just Josh, on a very practical standpoint, I think the other thing that's nice about approaching it that way is, like, from a go to market perspective, you also create a very simple sell down offer for somebody who's not sure that they're even ready to commit. So the flip side is like this keeps you out of like getting in trouble, but it also gives somebody else a lower commitment bar to get to as you start to think about selling an engagement and sort of working through it. So it sort of serves two purposes with both things, and you can stage it and frame it and structure it however you want, but it's sort of serving both purposes, right? And so oftentimes, like, I'm not even necessarily positioning that from a perspective of like, hey, I'm unsure of you. It's usually about like hey, this is our opportunity to get to know one another. I don't want you to have to commit. Most of the companies I work with, I shouldn't say that. I work with a variety of different size companies, but price is always going to be a point. It doesn't matter whether you're a $250 million client or you're a $2 million client. Everybody's always concerned about price. And so it gives an opportunity to sort of have some of those conversations in a little bit of a different framework, and sort of build to a solution that says, like, here's the stage and the gates that we sort of work through, that sort of create an environment for folks to sort of sort of contemplate and consolidate things down into a manageable sort of piece of the puzzle versus this huge sort of ambiguous sort of effort that we're going to go through over the next 12, 18, 24 months, etc.
That's good. That's a good word. Beneficial for both sides.
Yep.
I hear you guys. Thank you.
Kurt.
Yes, thanks. So there, when you go in and start working with a new company, clearly you have to get access to and wrap your mind around certain data to understand what's going on. But one of the things that I've seen as well is not all the time, but sometimes I find that I have to double click on some of that stuff and decide which of it I actually believe. And if I don't believe, then what do I do about it? So I guess my question is, to what extent do you find that to be true as well? And how much of your initial period do you kind of give yourself to do that kind of thing if you find it?
I love to say, prove it, right? Like everybody in my first conversation, every variable, every metric that they track is great because they're trying to impress me or impress somebody or delude themselves. I'm not sure which it is, frankly, but they'll, all the metrics are great. And I'm like, cool, where's that number come from? Like, tell me how you got that. Well, hey, something's not adding up if you have this, this many leads and this conversion rate. By my math, you're doing twice as much revenue as you're actually doing. So what am I missing? So I try to do it in a Socratic way, and a very like humble posture of like, I'm the dumbest guy in the room here. Like, please explain, what am I missing? But 100%, if you don't surface those things sooner than later, and you don't actually have an understanding or get to a level where you're confident in the numbers and what they're indicating, then you're just setting yourself up for problems later.
Yeah, I'm like unashamedly annoying about asking questions. Like, help me understand this. Send me all the info, send me all the things, even if it's not on my list. If you think it might be real, just send it over. I want to look at all of it. Yes, we're having this meeting on this day, but in between now and then, I'm going to be calling you. I'm going to be emailing you. I want to wrap my head around this. I want to make sure I know exactly what we're looking at. And yeah, I'm just like unapologetically obnoxious the first month.
I thought you were in a lucky spot that you were getting data. I was like, dang, Kurt's getting data. This is amazing. I think that so many times I come in and people haven't even aligned on like what are their KPIs and what are they tracking against and what are their goals. And so, but I do agree. The source you have to get to the source. So just a +1 to what Ian and Lauren said. At this point, you signed the contract, so you're good. You could ask all the questions you want in the world, and I think that you need to take that entry time. And I like how Ian said, like, humble posture. I'm not an expert in this, industry, or haven't worked in this role before, or whatever it is. Can you explain to me like how this works, or, just kind of playing that new person card? I would play that all day long and ask. But yeah, if I get data, that's a win. I think that's a win.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, I think you're up next.
Yeah, thank you all. So I'm curious, assuming you've got alignment across the leadership team, how do you handle cases where you get into the project and you realize that part of the problem is actually one of the functions you're working with has a gap on their own team. So you maybe hired to fill a gap in one function, and then the adjacent function that you have to coordinate with, the leader doesn't have time to sort of step down and take on either a new activity or take on part of a project. Do you step in and sort of fill that gap on their team, or do you surface that and try and get them to bring in additional resources? How do you approach those sort of cross-functional dependencies where there's no one to pick up the baton as you're trying to pass it?
No,
Is
I
it
don't try to fill those gaps anymore because I used to. And I was like, this isn't sustainable for me. It's not best for the team. Like, this is a really bad way of overfunctioning. Not good. We actually ran into this with the client I just onboarded. This was something that like I reflected on and went, okay, this would be a great thing to review ahead of time before we present some recommendations, because we weren't aware of how NetSuite was actually not working as well as the CEO thought that it was. And so by the time we got back with our recommendations, the accounting team was like, wait, you want us to do what? Like, we're drowning. We're already working like 50 hours, 60 hours a week. Da, da, da. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And so we had to kind of adjust things. And we were, thankfully, this team is super, super collaborative. So we were able to go, okay, what is actually realistic for you guys? What would help take things off of your plate? Like, really looking how you can serve 2 layers deep without doing the work for them. And then being really honest about, okay, well, then if you have this capacity among your team, this is going to be the pace of the results. This is how I would order it. First priority, second, third. If you can bring on someone else, this is how, this is why I think it's a great idea, or you don't have enough money to do that. So we're going to have to go slower. But again, I think it comes back to setting and managing those expectations and not forcing a plan that's not realistic operationally. Anyway, those are my thoughts. But being super, super honest about it and not just saying, well, here's what I think you should do.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
I also go ahead, Ian.
Sorry, Josh. I'll just add that like boundaries are critically important. And so, not taking on that role just by default, but you could approach both your sort of sponsor, whoever, you're working directly with, say, hey, this is an issue, and potentially become a resource to that other function in a consultative way to say, hey, you don't have this piece on your team, or this function on your team. You need this function. Is the issue that you don't know how to draft a job description, you don't know the person or something like that? Because I have seen cases where that's really the issue, is that they know that they're missing something, they don't know what it is. And in this situation, you could write a job description that's exactly what you need for your project to be successful. Maybe they hire that person, plug them in, and now you've got an ally in that other function. So that's playing the long game. Certainly, I think my initial response would be definitely don't take that on. Do discuss it, but don't just inherit work that isn't filled out in the organization.
Yeah, I'd agree with everything that the panel said. I think the interesting dynamic that starts to happen here is sort of that recognition and realization that you are sort of playing. There's a duality of the reality of your role. There is a doer, but there is also a leader, right? And so the reality here is that yes, there are some things that we need to do, and there will be moments where I need to go do things, but I'm also not just being paid to go execute. I'm also being paid because of my expertise and my experience that I bring in here. And the line of sight that you have to various sort of things is super helpful. That line of sight, that experience also has introduced you to a lot of different people and a lot of different ways to participate as a thought leader. And so I've actually had a really good success rate of referring in other co-builders or other folks, like some people in here. I've brought into engagements and said, hey, like, I can't do this piece. Could you help? Is this something that you could help with? Right. But it starts to develop a level of continuity, because if there's a trust in terms of how you operate and an understanding of how you operate, the adage is good people know good people. And so there's a value of sort of bringing that likeness in. The other thing I will say is not having the fear of like, oh, if I don't do this, I'm going to be out. Okay. But that's the beauty of why we carry multiple engagements, right? Because as those things start to move on and as they start to evolve, we're not one client moving on or needing to do something different is never a bad thing. And I will tell you that more often than not, as I bring in other people and I've politely declined additional work, I've actually seen my role inside of those clients go deeper and not become more surface or end up on the outside looking in. And so I think there's a real value to remembering sort of it's not just the execution, it's also the expertise and leaning in on that to really draw those lines and those boundaries. Well, any last questions before we wrap up? Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you again, Lauren, Ian, Bree. Really appreciate you guys giving your hours. Everybody else, thank you for your time. A couple of themes that I heard around discernment, trust building, boundaries, wisdom, they all sort of run much deeper than any of the topics that we were talking. I'm sure we could all talk about them before for a much longer period of time. But one last thing I did just want to go over here before I give you your information back is, we spent a lot of time talking with different folks, and a lot of the topics that we're talking about have been pretty consistent themes, especially for folks who are just getting started in the fractional space. And so one of the things that we are going to be launching in the fall with YOKE is something called the Proving Ground. It's a 6-week program that we're going to be launching for folks who are newer in the fractional space, who are just trying to figure this out and get an understanding of, hey, how do I do some of these things? How do I formulate my entity? How do I go through and think about, do I need a bank account? Do I need business insurance? Do I need all these things? All the things that, quite candidly, and I see Bree laughing and nodding her head, that I spent way too many hours and long nights trying to figure out on my own that really shouldn't be that hard. And so we're going to sort of consolidate that all into a 6-week session. It's going to also talk about helping define your market, getting a core offering together, your ICP, your messaging, how to have some of those conversations, get out and do those things. I'm going to include that information in the summary when we send this out. But I just want to make sure that you guys know that that's available. And actually, quite candidly, I'm looking at a couple of faces right now of direct feedback I got from folks when I sent out my email a couple of months ago that really helped to inform the development of this. And so I really appreciate you guys being engaged in that. That's really what this community is about. How do we keep continuing to help inform and support one another and come alongside one another? So be on the lookout for that. Thank you all again for being here. Thanks to our panelists. And now let's all go build something worth pulling. All right. Have a good one, guys.